I used to believe I had everything. Everything I ever wanted, everything that the world told me I should have. A prominent family name, a legacy that stretched back for generations. A thriving business, Davis Enterprises, built from the ground up by my husband and me. And most importantly, a son, William, who would carry the Davis legacy forward into the future. He was the crown jewel of everything we had worked for. Our pride and joy. The one thing that had always kept our family together. But it wasn't as perfect as it seemed. No one could see that at first. Not even me. I had convinced myself that my decisions were always right, that every action we took in shaping our son's future was for his benefit. But when I think back, I see how wrong I was. I see how my pride and prejudice clouded my judgment and led me to make decisions that would hurt not only my son, but also the woman he once loved, Amara, and the child I had never known. The day everything changed, everything I thought I knew about my family came crashing down. I was sitting in my study, sipping my tea, going through the usual piles of paperwork that came with running a multi-billion-dollar corporation, when I got the phone call. My assistant's voice on the other end was filled with urgency, yet still maintaining a polite tone that hinted at something being terribly wrong. "Mrs. Davis, there's been a situation. A young boy, Noah, called Mr. William today. He called him Dad. The boy's mother is in the emergency room, and Noah asked William to pick him up." My assistant's voice trembled slightly, the words still echoing in my ears. "I thought you should know." The words were like a bolt of lightning. Noah! The name struck me like a whisper from the past I had desperately tried to bury. It was a name I hadn't heard in years, a name I never expected to hear again. But there it was, piercing through the silence of my office, the sharp reminder of a chapter in our lives that we had tried so hard to close. I didn't know why, but I felt an immediate rush of nausea and dread. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. How could this be? Noah, the son of Amara, my son's former love? Memories of those days rushed back in a painful flood. Memories I had long buried beneath layers of wealth, power, and pride. I remembered the love William had for Amara. I remembered the strength of their bond, their passion for each other, but I also remembered the way we tore them apart, my husband and I, believing that we were protecting our son's future. We had done everything in our power to keep them apart. We had used our influence, our wealth, and our status to drive a wedge between them, to make sure that William would never marry Amara. She wasn't the right one for him, we told ourselves. She wasn't from the right background. She wasn't even the right race. Looking back now, I can see how wrong we were, how cruel we were to make those decisions for him. William had been young, in love, and so deeply connected to Amara. But we had believed that his future, his legacy, was more important than the woman he loved, more important than his happiness. That phone call sent me spiraling back to those painful memories. William had loved Amara with all his heart. He had wanted to build a life with her, a life that was different from the one we had envisioned for him. But we had been selfish. We had pushed her away. And now, years later, her son, our grandson, was calling William Dad. I couldn't deny it any longer. This boy, this Noah, had our family's features. I could see it now. His eyes, his chin, even that stubborn little smirk that William had when he was a boy. I realized in that moment that this was our blood, this was our legacy, and I had done everything in my power to destroy it. I immediately contacted Michael, my husband, and shared the news. He was just as shocked as I was, but our reactions were different. He was silent, as he always was in moments of crisis. I was left with the overwhelming task of processing the realization that our son had a child we never knew about, a child born from a love we had killed with our prejudice and pride. I couldn't understand how I felt. Part of me felt anger at Amara for having kept this from us, anger at William for not telling us about this child, but another part of me felt guilt, guilt for the way we had treated Amara, guilt for tearing them apart, guilt for the pain we had caused, not just to them, but now to this child who had been born out of a love we had refused to accept. The next day I heard from William. His voice was steady, but there was something different in it, something I hadn't heard before. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was just determined. I'm going to meet him, William said, his voice quiet but resolute. I'm going to meet Noah. I have to. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? I couldn't stop him. I had no right to stop him. Not after everything we had done. He had every right to meet his son. But what if he wasn't ready? What if this child was too much of a reminder of all the pain we had caused? Still, I couldn't bring myself to tell him not to go. He was his own man now, and I had done enough damage over the years. The least I could do was let him make his own decisions, even if it tore me apart inside. As I sat there reflecting on my son's decision, my mind wandered back to that day. The day we had decided to intervene in his life, to tear him away from Amara. It wasn't just about love. It was about control. It was about making sure our family name, our legacy, stayed pure. In doing so, we had crushed William's spirit. And now we had a grandson we never knew about, and it was too late to turn back the clock. I wanted to meet Noah. I wanted to hold him and apologize for everything I had done to keep him away. But I wasn't sure I was ready. Could I face the child who had been born from the love I had tried to destroy? Would I ever be able to look him in the eye? I had no answers. Only guilt. Only the deep, bitter realization that I had failed as a mother. And now I had to figure out how to make things right, if it was even possible. The next few days felt like a blur. After that fateful phone call, everything changed. William's determination was evident in every step he took toward meeting Noah. But there was something else, something more powerful driving him now. The anger and betrayal I expected to see in his eyes never materialized. Instead, there was quiet resolve. He didn't show the heartbreak I thought would surface. The bitterness I feared would take root. He just did what he knew was right. He made the decision to acknowledge Noah. He wanted to meet him, get to know him, and do right by the child, even though it meant confronting a past we had all tried to forget. It was the day after he met Noah that he called me into his office. His expression was serious, yet his voice was calm. He wasn't angry at me. He wasn't upset, not in the way I had imagined. What I saw in his eyes was a mixture of pain and understanding, a realization of what had been taken from him and from Noah. "Mom, I met him," William said, his voice steady, but there was an undeniable sadness there. He's mine. He's my son." I felt my breath catch in my throat as I stared at him, unsure of what to say. What could I say? This boy, this child who had been denied his right to know his father, was now standing in front of us, asking questions that I couldn't answer. William's voice cracked slightly as he continued, and I could see the weight of his words sinking in. "He's my son, Mom, and I can't just turn away from that." William's words weren't just a declaration of his paternal responsibility. They were a reckoning. He wasn't just embracing Noah as a son, but also accepting the reality of everything that had been kept from him. He was seeing the damage we had caused, and he wasn't going to let it continue. I wanted to apologize, to tell him how sorry I was for what we had done, but I couldn't find the words. How could I? The pain in his voice was enough. He didn't need my apology. He needed my support. He needed me to stand by him, not as the proud mother of a powerful businessman, but as a mother who had failed to see what was right in front of her. But instead of screaming, instead of lashing out at the injustice of it all, William simply nodded and turned away. He didn't need to say anything more. His eyes said it all. He had made his decision. He was going to be there for Noah. He was going to make up for the time lost, the bond that had been broken. The next step was the hardest one. William insisted on having a DNA test done, and I could see the relief in his face when the results came back confirming what he already knew. Noah was his son. The resemblance was undeniable. Noah had William's eyes, his chin, and even that stubborn little smirk I had once seen on my son's face when he was a child. But what struck me the most wasn't the physical resemblance. It was the way William reacted to the news. He didn't celebrate. He didn't shout with joy, as I had expected. Instead, he simply took the papers, folded them carefully, and placed them on the desk in front of him. "Noah deserves to know the truth," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the paperwork. "I need to make things right, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure he knows he's not alone." I could see how much the situation had affected him. William had always been the type to take responsibility, even when it wasn't easy. But this was a new level of responsibility. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about family, about love, and about forgiveness. And the truth that William had uncovered wasn't just about Noah, it was about me and his father and everything we had done to try and control his life. The more William investigated, the more he uncovered the truth about how we had manipulated everything to keep Amara away. We had used our wealth, our influence, and our power to drive a wedge between them. We thought we were protecting him, but in reality we were destroying him, destroying their love, destroying his happiness. William didn't just find the truth, he acted on it. He took responsibility for the role we had played in his and Amara's broken relationship. He didn't flinch when the painful truth became clear. He didn't back down, even when it meant confronting the very people who had once been the pillars of his life, his own parents. And when he did, when he learned the full extent of what we had done, it wasn't anger that overcame him. It was sadness. Sadness that he had been forced into a corner for so long, unable to truly follow his heart. Sadness that we, his parents, had been the ones to take that from him. The reality of what had happened hit him like a ton of bricks. He had always trusted us. He had always believed that we knew what was best for him, but now that trust had been shattered. William didn't scream at us. He didn't lash out. Instead, he quietly began to make plans to fix what we had broken. And it wasn't just about him and Noah. It was about the legacy of the Davis family. William stood tall in that moment, and as I looked at him, I realized just how much he had grown. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was a man who had the courage to face the past, to right the wrongs, and to build a future that included his son, the child we had tried to keep from him. And in that moment, I realized that the legacy of the Davis family wasn't about wealth, power, or control. It was about love, forgiveness, and taking responsibility for the mistakes of the past. William was teaching me that the real measure of greatness came not from what we had achieved, but from how we chose to treat others, and how we chose to right the wrongs we had done along the way. The next few days felt like an emotional whirlwind for William. Once the truth was laid bare, there was no going back. He couldn't pretend that the life he had built, the family he had honored, was unaffected by the deep wounds we had inflicted. What started as an attempt to claim back his right to be with his son turned into something far bigger. It wasn't enough for William to simply embrace Noah. No, he needed to confront everything, the lies, the manipulation, the wrongs we had perpetuated for years, all under the guise of protecting the family legacy. He wasn't just seeking redemption for himself. He was doing it for Noah, for Amara, and for the very principles he had once been taught to uphold. And so, he did what none of us had expected. William stood before the board of Davis Enterprises, the company that had once been a symbol of our family's success, and dropped a bombshell. He exposed everything. The deliberate steps my husband and I had taken to keep Amara away from him, the influence we had wielded, and the lives we had ruined in the process. "Ladies and gentlemen," William began, standing at the head of the boardroom table. His voice was calm, but there was a gravity to it that demanded attention. "What you don't know is that the empire we built was built on something other than the foundations of hard work and honor. It was built on control, manipulation, and prejudice, and I can't live with that anymore." The room fell silent. Every single board member, every person who had once admired William for his drive, his success, was now faced with the truth that they had overlooked for years. The company, which had been one of the most successful in its field, had been built on the broken backs of a family that had been torn apart by greed and old prejudices. William didn't raise his voice. He didn't get emotional or angry. He was cold, resolute, and deeply hurt by the betrayal he had uncovered. It was as though he had finally taken off the blinders that had been placed on him since birth, and what he saw was painful beyond measure. "You all know what I've done for this company," William continued, his eyes scanning the faces of the people who had once been his trusted allies. "But today I'm going to show you that my integrity, my values, are worth more than the legacy we've built here. I am going to change things. We will start by restructuring the company." The room erupted into nervous whispers, but William held up his hand for silence. "We're going to create the Noah Davis Foundation, a place that will support individuals and families who have been wronged by prejudice. We will use our wealth, our position, to make sure that we never again turn a blind eye to people who are pushed aside because of their race or background. We will not be a company that operates in a bubble of privilege. We will be a company that stands for fairness, for justice, and for inclusion. The board members were stunned. The decision wasn't just about financial restructuring. It was a challenge to everything they had built with him. And then came the hardest part, William's next statement. It wasn't just a company-wide shift. It was a personal one. "I'm stepping down," he said quietly. "And so are you, Dad. You and Mom. You've made it clear that our legacy was built on lies. I'm not going to carry that weight any longer. The company's future and my son's future are what matter now." It was as though time froze. I watched as the reality of what had just been said hit my husband. He sat there, his face pale, his hands trembling. The man who had spent years controlling William's life, manipulating his every move to fit our version of the perfect family, was now being forced to face the consequences of his actions. I had always thought that we could control the situation, that we could control William's life. But in that moment, I realized just how powerless we really were. William wasn't the boy we had tried to mold him into. He was a man with his own morals, his own sense of justice, and his own love for his family. His next words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he had just unveiled. "This company will not survive if we continue to run it this way. It's time to rebuild." And rebuild he did. But it wasn't just about the business. It was about his own redemption. It was about repairing the relationships he had been denied because of our actions. It was about creating a legacy not built on control, but on love and acceptance. As the board members slowly filed out of the room, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. There was anger. Yes, anger at the way things had unfolded. But mostly there was deep, deep regret. William wasn't just taking down the company we had built. He was taking down the false image we had created of ourselves. And in its place, he was building something better. I watched as he sat in his chair, head bowed, his fingers gripping the arms of the seat. There was no more pride in him. There was only a quiet determination to do what was right. In that moment, I saw the son I had raised. But more than that, I saw a man who had taken ownership of his life, his past, and his future. As William began to draft the official papers, outlining the plans for the Noah Davis Foundation and restructuring the company, he didn't look back. He wasn't interested in what his father had done or what we had tried to protect him from. He was only interested in one thing: giving Noah the family and future he deserved. And as I watched my son take charge of his life, I knew that everything had changed. And perhaps, just maybe, I could finally begin to make amends for everything I had lost along the way. A month passed, and the dust from William's revelations began to settle, but the ripples from that day in the boardroom were felt far beyond the walls of Davis Enterprises. The company had gone through a major transformation. It wasn't just the restructuring, the new initiatives, or the vast changes to the way business was conducted. It was the cultural shift that had taken place within its very foundation. The Noah Davis Foundation had launched, and its purpose was clear: to foster inclusivity, provide equal opportunities, and challenge the discriminatory practices that had once been entrenched in the company. But there was one thing that still lingered in the air: my relationship with my son. I had tried for years to control him, to shape his future the way I thought it should be. But in doing so, I had lost sight of what really mattered: the love and trust between us. I knew it wouldn't be easy to rebuild that, but I had to try. William had made his stand, and now it was my turn to make mine. A week after the restructuring was completed, William called me. It was the first time since the day he had announced his decision to step down that we had spoken openly without barriers. "Mom, can you meet me at the foundation office?" His voice was calm, but I could sense the weight behind his words. "There's something I want to show you." I hesitated for a moment. I knew this wasn't just about the foundation. This was about us, about repairing what had been broken. I had hurt him more than anyone, and the thought of facing him after everything was overwhelming. But I also knew that if I didn't show up now, I might lose him for good. I arrived at the office early the next morning. As I stepped into the sleek, modern building that housed the Noah Davis Foundation, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This was William's vision, a vision he had created to bring people together, to make the world a better place for those who had been ignored and oppressed. It was a legacy, but not one built on money or control. This was a legacy built on love and compassion. William was waiting for me in his office, a space filled with photographs of his meetings with community leaders, young people benefiting from the foundation, and images of Noah with his arms wrapped around William's shoulders. There was a sense of warmth in the room, a stark contrast to the cold, corporate offices we once occupied. "Mom, I know this hasn't been easy," William began, his voice soft but steady. "You've been a part of my life, but you've also been part of the reason I struggled to trust others, especially those I loved." I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I had known, of course, that my actions had hurt him, but hearing him say it out loud felt like a punch to the gut. I had done everything in my power to protect him, but in reality, I had done the opposite. "William," I started, my voice shaking, "I can't undo the damage I've caused. I can't erase the past, but I want you to know I'm here. I'm here to support you, and I'm here to support Noah. I want to make things right." For the first time, I saw William soften. His eyes, which had once been so guarded, were now filled with a quiet sadness. He stood up and walked over to me, taking my hands in his. "You don't have to fix everything, Mom," he said, his voice steady. "But what matters now is that we've started to make things right. We've created something good with Noah, something that I know will change lives. I just want you to be a part of it." And with that, the tension between us lifted, even if just a little. The years of bitterness, of resentment, of guilt weren't going to disappear overnight. But for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. Hope that we could rebuild the broken pieces of our family, not by erasing the past, but by facing it and moving forward together. Over the next few weeks, I spent time getting to know Noah. He was everything I hadn't expected: bright, compassionate, and full of energy. He had inherited so much from William, and yet there was something uniquely special about him. The connection between us was instantaneous. Every moment spent with him felt like a step toward healing. One afternoon, as I watched Noah play with his new toys at the Foundation's community center, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't just a second chance for my son. It was a second chance for me too. A chance to make amends, to rebuild, and to create the kind of family I had always wanted. A family not defined by wealth, power, or control, but by love, trust, and forgiveness. As I stood there watching Noah, I felt William's presence beside me. He had finally found his peace with the past, and so had I. Together, we were building a future, one that was rooted in understanding, compassion, and, most importantly, respect. For the first time, I understood the true meaning of legacy. It wasn't about what you built with your hands, it was about the love you built with your heart. And with Noah in our lives, we had begun to build something that would last for generations to come. As I looked at William and Noah, I finally realized that my son hadn't just rebuilt his own life. Rosa Ellis had lived a life full of joy and hardship, and through it all, she had carried herself with grace and dignity. At 84 years old, her body was slowing down, but her spirit was as strong as ever. Her gray hair was neatly tied in a bun beneath a floral scarf, and she still wore her clothes with elegance, even if they weren't as fancy as the newer styles. There was something timeless about her presence. It was the kind of quiet strength that commanded respect without asking for it. On this particular morning, Rosa was dressed in her Sunday best, a light blue dress that had seen better days, a small purse, and her favorite pair of comfortable shoes. She wasn't here for a fancy occasion. No, this day was about something far more personal. Her grandson, Michael. Michael had invited her to a special event at his company's headquarters. He was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar construction firm, one of the biggest in the city, and today he was delivering a keynote speech at a major industry conference. Michael had always been the apple of Rosa's eye. She'd raised him with love and sacrificed everything for him to have the opportunities she never had. She knew this was a significant moment in his career, and she was determined to be there. Rosa wasn't someone who sought the limelight. She had always preferred to stay in the background, supporting those she loved without expecting anything in return. But today she wanted to be there for Michael, to show him that no matter how much success he achieved, she would always be there, cheering him on. She didn't need fancy clothes or expensive accessories to feel proud. She had built her legacy with hard work and love, not with material things. Rosa stepped out of her apartment, her cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement as she made her way to the corner. She had called for a taxi using her old flip phone, the one she'd had for years. It was nothing special, but it worked, and that's all she needed. The taxi arrived, a plain yellow car, and Rosa slowly made her way to the back door. She wasn't in a hurry. She was just enjoying the moment. The quiet streets, the anticipation of seeing Michael, the feeling of being needed. But when the taxi driver saw her, his expression shifted. He didn't smile. He didn't open the door for her. Instead, he stared at her with a mixture of confusion and impatience, as if she were an inconvenience. Rosa smiled faintly and waved her hand, signaling that she was ready to get in. But the driver didn't budge. "You sure this is your ride?" he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. Rosa's heart sank. She had been in taxis countless times before, but this was different. She didn't understand it at first. She had grown accustomed to the subtle ways in which people could be unkind, but this felt different. The driver didn't even try to hide his judgment. Without a word, he opened the door, but didn't help her inside. Rosa hesitated for a moment before managing to slide into the back seat, her movements slow but deliberate. She adjusted her purse on her lap and tried to ignore the discomfort creeping up her spine. "Where to?" the driver asked, his tone still cold, but with an air of dismissive indifference. 150 Park Avenue, please," Rosa replied softly, trying to keep her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. The driver didn't acknowledge her response. He just started driving, his eyes glued to the road as if he couldn't care less about who sat in the back seat. The ride was quiet, except for the sound of the radio blaring some loud pop music that made Rosa's head ache. She wanted to ask the driver to turn it down, but she didn't want to make a scene. She'd learned long ago that it was better to keep the peace. But as she sat there, looking out the window, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As the taxi drove through the busy city streets, Rosa's thoughts turned to Michael. She was so proud of him. He had always been a determined young man, and she had supported him through every step of his journey, from his early days in school to his rise in the corporate world. Michael had worked hard to get where he was, and now he was about to speak to an audience that would be listening to his every word. He had come so far, and she was thrilled to be a part of this moment. But despite her excitement, Rosa couldn't ignore the way she felt in that moment. The silence between her and the driver weighed heavily on her. She had spent her life building a sense of self-respect, and yet there were still moments when she felt invisible, when people saw her for her age and her appearance rather than who she really was. The taxi reached its destination, and as the car slowed to a stop in front of the Grand Conference building, the driver didn't speak a word. He didn't even offer to help her out of the car. He just sat there staring ahead. Rosa, feeling the sting of his disregard, opened the door herself. She wasn't surprised, not really. She had experienced this kind of treatment before, but it hurt just the same. She had worked hard her entire life, and yet here she was, still being treated like she didn't matter, simply because of her age and the way she looked. She slowly made her way toward the entrance of the building, holding her head high despite the pain in her heart. She wasn't just an old woman. She was a woman with a lifetime of experiences, a woman who had raised a family, who had built a legacy of love and care. She wasn't invisible, but as she approached the entrance, she saw the staff and security guards standing at the doors. They didn't look at her. They didn't greet her. In fact, it almost seemed as if they were purposefully avoiding making eye contact. She tried not to let it bother her, but it did. Rosa stepped inside the building, but she could feel the coldness around her. She made her way to the elevator and pressed the button to take her to the top floor, where Michael would be speaking. She wasn't going to let this moment ruin her day. She was there for him, and she was going to be proud of everything he had accomplished. But as she stood waiting for the elevator, she couldn't shake the feeling that the world was still judging her, still seeing her as something less than. The way the driver had treated her, the way the staff ignored her, it was all too familiar. It was a reminder of the world's subtle bias against people like her, those who had lived a long life, those who didn't fit into society's narrow definitions of worth. As the elevator doors opened and she stepped inside, Rosa took a deep breath. She wasn't going to let this define her day. She was there for Michael, and that's all that mattered. Today was about him, and she wasn't going to let the world's judgment take that from her. But little did Rosa know, the encounter she had with the taxi driver and the treatment she received from the staff would set off a chain of events that would change everything. Not just for her,